there comes a moment you never see on the outside. No text, no apology, no dramatic confession, no midnight knock at your door. Just silence. And if you've ever loved someone with avoidant patterns, you know how cruel that silence can feel. It doesn't sound empty. It sounds loaded. It sounds like rejection, indifference, replacement. It sounds like everything your body is terrified of hearing. You replay the last message, the last glance, the last soft moment that made you believe there was something real here. And then nothing. Just distance where warmth used to be. Just cold space where connection once breathed. So you do what almost everyone does when they're standing in that kind of emotional darkness. You reach. A little more. Then a little more. Then too much. You explain yourself. You soften your tone. You become more patient than you've ever been. You try not to trigger them. You try to be understanding. You tell yourself they're scared. You tell yourself love means staying calm while your nervous system is quietly catching fire. You tell yourself that if you just say it the right way, love them the right way, wait the right way, they'll come back. But here is the brutal truth most people do not want to hear. The moment an avoidant feels you will never leave, they often feel less urgency to face what they feel. And the moment they feel you slipping away for real, something inside them starts to crack. Not because they're evil. Not because they were pretending. Not because they never cared. Because they were surviving. That is the part nobody tells you. Avoidant behavior is not calm. It only looks calm from the outside. Inside, it is often a storm disguised as control. Their body learned a long time ago that closeness can become danger, that dependence can become humiliation, that needing someone can become pain. So when love gets deep, when intimacy stops being flirtation and starts becoming emotional reality, the nervous system does not interpret that as romance. It interprets it as threat. That's why they can want you and withdraw from you at the exact same time. That's why they can miss you while ignoring you. That's why they can care deeply and still go cold enough to make you question your own sanity. It is not logical. It is physiological. When connection gets intense, the amygdala can fire like an alarm system that doesn't know the fire is old. Cortisol rises. The body prepares for danger. Their chest tightens. Thoughts blur. Irritation increases. And suddenly the very person who felt safe yesterday now feels overwhelming today. Not because you changed, because closeness activated a wound their body still thinks it has to survive. And the fastest way to regulate that panic is distance, space, delay, detachment, silence. Silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is an avoidant person trying not to drown in feelings they do not know how to hold. And yet this is where everything turns. Because there is a difference between giving love and abandoning yourself. A difference between compassion and self-erasure. A difference between understanding someone's wounds and volunteering to bleed inside them. Eventually, something in you gets tired. Not dramatic, not loud, just tired. Tired of translating mixed signals into hope. Tired of calling crumbs connection. Tired of pretending your body doesn't notice the inconsistency. Tired of being emotionally available for someone who only shows up when the pressure is gone and disappears when closeness becomes real. And then one day, maybe without even planning it, you stop. You stop chasing. You stop explaining. You stop trying to rescue the bond with the same hands that have been burned by it. You go quiet. Not to manipulate, not to punish, because something sacred inside you finally realizes that begging for love will never feel like love. That is when the panic begins. Not always instantly. Avoidant panic has stages. Strange ones, delayed ones, contradictory ones. It does not look like the panic of someone who sobs at your door. It is quieter than that, more psychological, more haunting. It moves through them in waves, and if you are not careful, the first wave is the one that tricks you into thinking they never cared at all. At first, they feel relief. Yes, relief. When you finally stop reaching, a part of them exhales. The pressure lifts. No heavy conversation waiting, no mirror being held up to them, no expectation to clarify, commit, or emotionally show up. Their nervous system mistakes your absence for safety. They sleep easier for a night or two. They tell themselves this is better, cleaner, simpler. They distract. They scroll. They dive into work. They act normal. They may even look happier. This is the part that hurts the most, if you don't understand what's happening. Because while you are sitting there grieving the loss, they appear untouched. But relief is not peace. Relief is the body coming down from perceived threat. It says nothing about the depth of feeling underneath. It only means the trigger is no longer in the room. Then comes the second stage. The echo. Your absence starts making noise. Because once the nervous system settles, the emotional reality they were outrunning begins to surface. There is no new message from you to manage, no emotional demand to defend against, no immediate pressure to numb. And in that strange, open space, they start noticing what is missing. Your check-in, your warmth, your predictability, your emotional presence. That soft access they had to your heart whenever they wanted it. The human brain is built around patterns, and when a pattern vanishes, the mind goes back to it again and again, trying to restore order. Dopamine is deeply tied to anticipation, reward, and interrupted cycles. When you disappear from the rhythm they got used to, their mind starts searching for you, even if their pride insists otherwise. They open the chat and close it. They reread old messages. They wonder what you're doing. They notice how much quieter the day feels without your energy in it. This is when the avoidant begins to feel something they hate feeling. Need. Not full acceptance of it. Not yet. Just the first sting of it. And because they have spent so much of their life associating need with danger, that realization does not feel romantic. It feels destabilizing. It feels like the floor moving. It feels like losing control of the story they told themselves about being fine alone. Then comes the third stage. The obsession they will never call obsession. This is where you start living in their mind in ways they never expected. They begin constructing little private scenes. Are you talking to someone else? Did you really let go? Are you done this time? Was I more attached than I thought? Why does it bother me that they aren't here? Why do I keep checking? This stage is brutal because it collides with their identity. Avoidant people often rely on distance to feel in control. They are comfortable being the one who leaves first, pulls back first, disconnects first. But when you genuinely withdraw your emotional pursuit, the power dynamic changes. Suddenly they are not managing your closeness. They are confronting your absence. And absence is harder to control than affection. Because affection can be delayed. Absence cannot be negotiated. Now the same person who once left your messages unanswered starts feeling their own body jolt at the possibility that you have emotionally exited the building. Their appetite shifts. Sleep gets thinner. Small things irritate them. Their nervous system starts doing what yours used to do: scanning, wondering, interpreting silence. The mind that once seemed so sure becomes loud, restless, intrusive. This is where they start testing the door. A small reaction on your story, a random message, a casual question that means nothing and everything. A little breadcrumb designed to feel the temperature. Not a declaration, not accountability, just contact. Enough to see whether your heart still opens on command. And this is where so many people break. Because when you have been starving, a crumb feels holy. You see their name light up your screen, and your whole body floods. Dopamine, hope, relief, meaning. Your pain tries to convert that tiny moment into proof that everything you felt mattered, that all this waiting was worth it, that finally, they realized. Maybe they did realize. But realization is not transformation. That is the warning. Do not confuse panic with change. Panic can make an avoidant reach. Fear can make them affectionate. Loss can make them suddenly expressive. But if the pattern underneath is untouched, they are not returning because they are ready to love differently. They are returning because the distance became intolerable enough to override the defense for a moment. And moments are not the same thing as maturity. Then comes the fourth stage, the chase without language. If you remain grounded, if you do not rush to soothe them, if you do not instantly pour yourself back into the old dynamic, their panic deepens. They feel you are truly moving beyond reach. They sense that your energy has changed. You are no longer asking to be chosen. You are no longer sitting at the edge of their silence, trying to decode it into devotion. Something in you has become still. And stillness terrifies people who depended on your emotional availability as a safety net. Now they begin leaning in more curiosity, more contact, more nostalgia, more vulnerability than they previously allowed themselves. They may bring up memories. They may reference inside jokes. They may say they've been thinking about you. They may even sound softer than ever before, because for the first time, they are not protected by certainty. They do not know if you are still there. This is the hidden truth about your detachment. It forces them to feel. Not because detachment is a trick, but because when you stop overfunctioning, the emotional weight shifts back where it belongs. They are left alone with the consequences of what their avoidance cost. They are left with the reality of your absence instead of the comfort of your constant return. And if they cared, even in the broken, defended, conflicted way they knew how, that reality will shake them. They will think about the times you reached with tenderness and they responded with coolness. The times you tried to repair and they disappeared. The times they assumed you would always be there because you always had been. They will remember your patience, your softness, the places you swallowed your own pain just to keep the connection alive. And suddenly, your love, which once felt so available, becomes precious in retrospect. Humans often understand value most clearly at the point of possible loss. That is not always noble, but it is real. Then the fifth stage arrives. the collapse of the fantasy. This is when the avoidant can no longer comfortably maintain the old story. The story that they were just overwhelmed, the story that this was casual, the story that they could take or leave it, the story that your love would remain on a shelf for them whenever they felt ready enough to reach for it. Now they are forced to confront something much more painful. You may actually be gone. And with that realization comes grief. Real grief. Not always expressed beautifully, not always confessed, but grief all the same. The body feels it first. Restlessness, tight chest, sudden memories, emotional flooding at random times, longing mixed with shame, a desire to reach out, battling an equally strong urge to hide. They may romanticize you now. They may replay your absence as if it is a punishment. They may obsess over what you think of them. They may wonder if you hate them. They may wonder if you finally saw through them. And deeper underneath all of that, there is often one unbearable question. Why couldn't I just let myself love them while I had the chance? That is the question avoidance spends years trying not to feel. Because to feel it fully means confronting the original wound, the old helplessness, the old fear of needing and not receiving, the old belief that closeness ends in pain. If they face that, their entire identity structure starts to tremble. The distance that once protected them now looks like the very thing that destroyed what they wanted. This is why some avoidants come back with intensity after you have truly detached. Not because your suffering convinced them, not because your over-explaining finally worked, but because your absence forced them into contact with themselves, the self they had been outrunning, the hunger they had been denying, the grief they had been postponing. But listen carefully now. This is the part that determines whether your life changes or repeats itself. If they come back, and you meet them from the same abandoned version of yourself, the cycle will restart. If one soft message makes you forget the confusion, the inconsistency, the emotional loneliness, then their panic becomes your prison again. You will call it a second chance. Your body will call it familiar. But familiar is not always safe. Familiar is often just the shape of the wound. Do not break your own transformation just because someone finally felt the consequence of losing access to you. Read that again in your soul. Do not break your own transformation. Because the real story here was never only about when an avoidant panics. It was about what finally happens inside you when you stop living on emotional rationing, when you stop treating your needs like they are too much, when you stop translating neglect into complexity and inconsistency into mystery, when you stop making someone's incapacity into a measure of your worth. That is the real power shift. Not that they start chasing, not that they start missing you, not that they finally realize your value. Those things may happen, often they do. But the deepest shift is quieter. You realize that your peace cannot be built on someone else's readiness. You realize love is not supposed to feel like waiting in a hallway for a door that never fully opens. You realize your nervous system has been calling this uncertainty love, only because it became addicted to intermittent reward. A little attention, then distance. A little hope, then collapse. Dopamine spikes, cortisol crashes. Bonding through instability. That is not chemistry. That is survival wearing perfume. And once you see that, really see it, something ancient inside you begins to unclench. You stop wanting to be chosen by people who only recognize your value in your absence. You stop auditioning for the role of the one who understands everyone while abandoning themselves. You stop confusing being hard to love with being deep. You stop measuring your worth by how long someone took to wake up to it. Because your value was never hidden. They were defended. There is a difference. You were not too much. They were too armored. You were not hard to love. They were hard to reach. You were not asking for the impossible. You were asking for reciprocity. And that changes everything. So if you are in that silent space now, if you have pulled your energy back and part of you is trembling, wondering whether they notice, wondering whether they care, wondering whether your absence means anything at all, let this settle into you slowly. Yes, they may panic. Yes, they may miss you in ways they never admitted while you were there. Yes, they may finally feel the weight of what they lost. But your healing cannot depend on that. Your freedom begins the moment you no longer need their panic to prove your worth. That is when you become untouchable in the most beautiful sense. Not cold, not bitter, not closed. Just no longer available for half love. No longer hypnotized by inconsistency. No longer willing to sacrifice your nervous system to keep a connection alive that only survives when you are the one doing all the emotional labor. And that energy changes you. It changes your posture, your voice, your standards, your tolerance for confusion, the way you walk away from what cannot meet you. You stop asking, "Why did they pull away?" and start asking, "Why did I stay so long in a place where love kept asking me to betray myself?" That is the question that rebuilds a life. Because the moment an avoidant realizes you've given up, they may go through 5 stages of panic. But the moment you realize you no longer need to be chased to remember your value, you go through something far more powerful. You become whole. And once that happens, even if they come back, they are no longer meeting the version of you who begged to be seen. They are meeting someone who finally sees themselves. Someone who understands that love is not proved by longing alone. Someone who knows that being missed is not the same as being met. Someone who no longer mistakes delayed recognition for destiny. Someone whose heart is still soft, but no longer easy to abandon. Someone whose silence is no longer pain. It is self-respect. It is closure. It is power. And this time, whether they panic or not, whether they return or not, whether they finally understand or not, you do not disappear trying to be enough for someone who could only feel your worth when they felt your loss. You remain steady, clear, alive. And that, more than anything, is what they never expected. Not your tears, not your waiting, not your endless forgiveness. Your absence with dignity. Your love without self-betrayal. Your peace without their permission. That is when the story truly changes. Not when they realize what they lost. When you realize what you never should have had to lose to be loved.